Hello everyone, welcome to lesson 3.4A. I've entitled this video, Common Sense. This video is going to cover pages 165 to 168. The move toward independence. Lexington and Concord marked the start of armed conflict between colonists and the British, the beginning of the American Revolution. As the fighting spread, many colonists came to believe that Parliament did not have the right to make any laws for the 13 colonies. After all, they argued, the colonies had their own elected legislatures. Many felt it was time for the colonies to become completely independent from Britain. Question number 1. Why were the shots at Lexington and Concord an important moment in American history? It was because it is considered the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. Number 2. What were many colonists beginning to feel about our relationship with the British? That it was time for us, the 13 colonies, to be completely independent from Britain, to break those chains, to have that eagle egg hatch. The war comes to Boston. During the first year of conflict, much of the fighting centered around Boston. About 6,000 British troops were stationed there. Colonial militia surrounded the city and prevented the British from marching out. War breaks out near Boston Harbor. Even before Washington reached Boston, the Patriots took action. On June 16, 1775, Colonel William Prescott led 1,200 Minutemen up Bunker Hill across the Charles River from Boston. From there, they could fire on British ships in Boston Harbor. Prescott, however, noticed that nearby Breed's Hill was an even better place. He used the local geography to his advantage. A hilltop would be easier to defend, so he ordered his men to move there. At sunrise, the British general, William Howe, spotted the Americans. He ferried about 2,400 redcoats across the river to attack the rebels' position. As the British approached, the Patriots held their fire. When the Americans finally fired, the British were forced to retreat. A second British attack was also turned back. On the third try, the British pushed over the top. They took both Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill, but they paid a high price for their victory. More than 1,000 redcoats lay dead or wounded. American losses numbered only about 400. The Battle of Bunker Hill was the first major battle of the Revolution. It proved that the Americans could fight bravely. It also showed that the British would not be easy to defeat. Furthermore, it hinted that one effect of the Revolution would be continued bloodshed from a long and bitter war. Question number 3. During the first year of the Revolutionary War, much of the fighting was in which colonial city? Boston. Question 4. How did Colonel Prescott use strategy with the geography to help defeat the redcoats? That worksheet should say. It says to help the redcoats. It should say to help defeat the redcoats. He used the local geography to his advantage by getting on the hilltop. And in combat, if you've got the high ground, as Obi-Wan Kenobi would teach Anakin Skywalker, if you have the high ground, you have an advantage in conflict or in battle. So when you're on the top of the hill, it's much easier to fire down than for troops to be running up the hill trying to fire their guns at the same time. So he used his knowledge of the geography to get the high ground. Question 5. Summarize the Battle of Bunker Hill. While the Americans had the high ground and the British sent the first wave to attack, they didn't win. The second attack, they also were turned back. Finally, they won on the third try, but it came at a costly victory. They lost more than 2.5 times what the Americans lost. Question 6. What was the first major battle of the Revolutionary War? It was the Battle of Bunker Hill. Question 7. What did the Battle of Bunker Hill show about the Americans? That they could fight bravely. Question 8. What did the Battle of Bunker Hill show about the British? That they would not be easy to defeat. Washington forces the British out of Boston. When Washington reached Boston a few weeks after the Battle of Bunker Hill, he found about 16,000 troops camped in huts and tents around the city. General Washington quickly began to turn raw recruits into a trained army. His job was especially difficult because soldiers from different colonies mistrusted one another. He wrote about their behavior. Quote, Connecticut wants no Massachusetts men in her corps. And, quote, Massachusetts thinks there is no necessity for a Rhode Islander to be introduced into her ranks. However, Washington won the loyalty of his troops. They in turn learned to take orders and work together. In January of 1776, Washington had a stroke of good fortune. The cannons that the Green Mountain Boys had captured at Fort Ticonderoga arrived in Boston. Soldiers had dragged them across the mountains from Fort Ticonderoga. Washington had the cannons placed in a strategic location on Dorchester Heights overlooking the harbor. Once General Howe saw the American cannons in place, he knew that he could not hold Boston. In March 1776, he and his troops sailed from Boston to Halifax, Canada. About 1,000 American loyalists went with them. Although the British left New England, they did not give up. King George III ordered a blockade of all colonial ports. A blockade is the shutting of a port to keep people or supplies from moving in or out. The king also used mercenaries, or troops for hire, from Germany to help fight the colonists. Those mercenaries were called Hessians. Question number 9. What were two challenges facing General Washington when dealing with his troops? Well, number 1, each colony's troops mistrusted the soldiers from the other colonies, at least at the start. And secondly, they had a hard time because they were raw recruits. They weren't trained in this. They were just volunteers. These were not people who had spent their lives practicing for this. So they were very raw and inexperienced. Question number 10. As General Washington earned the loyalty of his troops, what two things did they begin to do much better? Number 1, they learned to take orders. And number 2, they learned to work together. Question 11. How did the cannons captured at Fort Ticonderoga help the American cause during the American Revolutionary War? Well, those cannons were moved over Boston, and so those cannons basically showed the British, if you don't leave, we're going to bomb you and you're going to lose a lot of people. So the British decided to leave Boston. They knew those cannons would devastate them, so they left. Question 12. What does the word blockade mean? You're going to get this word in 6th grade, in 7th grade, and in 8th grade. And each year, this word is used. So a blockade is the shutting of a port to keep people or supplies from getting in or getting out. Question number 13. What does the word mercenaries mean? Mercenaries are troops for hire. So basically they are soldiers that will work for pay. And they'll work for any country as long as that country is paying them. Those are called mercenaries. What did Thomas Paine say in Common Sense? Thomas Paine was a British writer and editor who moved to Philadelphia in 1774. After Lexington and Concord, Paine wrote the pamphlet Common Sense, in which he set out to change the colonist attitudes toward Britain and the king. Colonists, he said, did not owe loyalty to George III or any other monarch. The very idea of having kings and queens was wrong, he said. Primary source, Thomas Paine, Common Sense, 1776. In England, a king hath little more to do than to make war and give away jobs, which in plain terms is to impoverish the nation. Of more worth is one honest man to society and in the sight of God than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived. The colonists did not owe anything to Britain, either, Paine went on. If the British had helped the colonists, they had done so for their own profit. It could only hurt the colonists to remain under British rule. Quote, everything that is right or reasonable pleads for separation, he concluded. 'Tis time to part. Common Sense was a great success, selling over 500,000 copies in 6 months. Paine's writing played an important role in moving toward revolution. Question number 14. What influential pamphlet did Thomas Paine write that would help the American cause? He wrote Common Sense. Question 15. In Common Sense, what did Thomas Paine say about kings and queens? Well, number 1, he said, we did not owe loyalty to them. And number 2, he said, the idea of having kings and queens was just wrong. We did not need one person ruling. That was wrong. 16. In Common Sense, what did Thomas Paine say about the British? He said we didn't owe anything to the British either. He said, you know what? If they helped us, they did it so that they could make money for themselves. And he said it was only hurting us to be under their rule. And question 17, what was the conclusion of Thomas Paine's common sense? That it was time for complete separation. It was time for independence. Question 18, how well did common sense sell? Extraordinarily well. It sold over 500,000 copies in just 6 months. That is a huge hit for Thomas Paine. Question 19, why was common sense important in American history? Because it played an important role in getting the colonists to realize, yeah, you know what? Old Tommy Paine there is making some sense. We should be free from the British. Yeah, let's be free. Independence. Well, thank you for watching. Before we go, here's a meme. No pain, no gain. Thank you so much for watching, and have a nice day.